have some red skin that looks inflamed all throughout his scalp. So that is something that just has to be resolved. And you can see how oily it is too. Like, look how oily the area is, right? And that kind of prompts me to, yeah, it looks like he did improve some density. You know, he did improve on the density. I think this is realistic for a 6-month result, wouldn't you say, if you're looking at the screen, guys? Hey guys, before we continue this video, I would like to mention that we now have liposomal minoxidil sulfate on my website, folligens.com, FOLLIGENZ.com, and if the order queue is available and open, you can order it there. We're running it as a cosmetic. There are other sort of botanicals inside of this particular topical that are pretty helpful when it comes to conditioning the hair. So that's at folligens.com, FOLLIGENZ.com. That's FOLLIGENZ.com. Go check it out and maybe even try it out. See you there. Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another hair review video. And we're back on the Trustless subreddit, the #1 subreddit when it comes to looking at hair loss or talking about hair loss. And today we're looking at the user RealDesigner841, and the title of their post is, quote, 6 months on minoxidil and finasteride, unquote. Now let's just jump into it. So looking at his scalp, I can see a couple of things that immediately just, flare out to me. So obviously the picture on the top is the before and the picture on the bottom is the after. And you can see that he has made a substantial increase in his hairline area, the frontal section of his scalp. There's more hair. It's much more dense, and just in general, there is literally more hair coming out of the follicles. And sure, we can attribute that possibly to minoxidil and finasteride. Those definitely improve outcomes when it comes to androgenetic alopecia. But I want you guys to pay attention to this particular structure over here. Hopefully you guys can see it. Let me see if I can zoom into it more. I think that's the best that I can do. But this like crust, right? And also the blotches of red skin compared to his, normal skin. This red area over here, redness over here. Looks like some scaling, but this bit of flaking over here and scaling over here, this is a sign of poor scalp health. And usually, when people make these sort of dramatic improvements, it's because they have solved some kind of inflammatory issue they were dealing with in the area of their hair loss. Now, two things can be true at once. He could have been dealing with androgenetic alopecia. That's certainly the baseline issue that he had, but also in conjunction with perhaps a seborrheic dermatitis, right? This kind of looks like some sort of seborrheic dermatitis, episode that he's having on his scalp. But also, some people deal with, psoriasis, plaque psoriasis, right? And unless you're going to get a biopsy or some sort of in-depth dermatoscope scalp evaluation from a dermatologist, it's kind of hard to judge what you actually have, right? This, I could say, and, I'm not a doctor, but I could say, this looks like a seborrheic dermatitis that he's having in his frontal area. But I don't know what this, what the red skin is about, right? Because he does have some red skin that looks inflamed all throughout his scalp. So that is something that just has to be resolved. And you can see how oily it is too. Like, look how oily the area is, right? And that kind of prompts me to say that he's dealing with a seborrheic dermatitis, a chronic seborrheic dermatitis condition. And yes, seborrheic dermatitis can reduce the appearance of your hair's thickness, right? But also it can suppress your hair follicles' ability to produce hairs, right? Instead of producing like 3 hairs, it's going to produce like 2 or 1. So that's something to take into account. So it looked like he made an improvement in that sort of domain, because if you come down here, you can see a huge improvement in general with the density and the hairs themselves Uh, it's kind of, crazy how much improvement you can make within 6 months. But once those hair follicles come out of dormancy, they really, really go off to the races. They start growing pretty quickly. So that is a very good 6-month result. So let's go and look at this. Okay, so now we have another picture up close that he's showing us. That you can look at the oily scalp, this frontal section, how red and inflamed it looks on this side in particular, right? And then this crust of seborrheic dermatitis, or just what I can identifiably call skin, definitely is causing a bit of an issue for him. And just another picture over here, right? So let's look at the comparison. It's pretty much day and night. Now granted, he's probably not pulling back all of his hair. Maybe he's pulling back his hair a bit further back into his scalp in the after, but still you can see there's a reasonable amount of density in the frontal region that just wasn't there to a significant extent before, right? A lot of those follicles were clearly inflamed. So, this was a very much welcomed result. I'm sure he's happy about it. Look at that. Yikes. Anyway, let's go on to the next picture. So now we can see his temporal area. And yeah, very much weak. You can see all these like little pimples, at the base of the follicle. It just looks like he had this sort of inflammatory issue. You can see how oily the area of the scalp was. Very, very poor scalp health. And from what I can see, maybe you guys have to pay attention closely to this, but I think my eyes are kind of adapting to looking at these sort of issues. But you can kind of see like, the skin is much more red. There's like this demarcation line in certain areas of the skin where you can see red blotches. And that again is typically signs of inflammation, even over here, right? Again, it might be hard for you guys to see, but you gotta pay attention and look closely. Hey guys, sorry, this is me from the future. While I'm editing the video, I decided to jump in real quick because I forgot to mention this. You can always ask for a Woods lamp examination test if you don't want to do anything too invasive, right? Now, basically, you're going to be sitting in a dark room and they're going to be, your dermatologist, that is going to be shining a UV light at your scalp, and it can reveal if you have any sort of microbial issues or any sort of infectious skin disorders, right? So over here, this website's a pretty basic explanation. I'll leave this link in the description if you're curious about it, but really, yeah, it's definitely helpful to see if you have any sort of issue. This is a kid from a study, and he has ringworm, also known as tinea capitis, and the Woods lamp test is showing that, a sort of reaction to the UV light, where you can see where this microbe is causing issues on his scalp, this poor little dude's scalp. And, there's another study over here that involves tinea capitis as well. You can see this. And again, this is something you can ask for a test. So definitely talk to your doctor about it. And this is the after. Obviously not a good comparison in terms of photos because, the after is much closer. But you can see, I guess, a bit of improvement. The lighting is certainly different. But you do see a sort of hypertrichosis effect. That's clearly from the minoxidil because the hair that he has from his temporal region is venturing towards his eyebrow. But one thing he has to keep in mind is that he's still having these sort of seborrheic dermatitis issues, these skin flaking issues. And in the after, it's kind of more apparent. Maybe it's the lighting. But you see these like white flakes that my cursor is hovering over? That is possibly seborrheic dermatitis. So even in the after, his scalp condition is still pretty poor. So if he's not careful, if this becomes chronic, he can have these horrible sheds that kind of mask the general improvement he's getting from finasteride and minoxidil. But also, if it's topical minoxidil, the regular topical minoxidil with propylene glycol and ethanol, then it could be the case that that's causing his scalp to have a sort of irritation, rather, and that irritation is going to lead to skin flaking, scalp flaking, right? And that can cause the follicles to kind of be destabilized, and then people typically start itching at it, picking at it, pulling their hair out. You'd be surprised, right, what people do while they're sleeping. You know, some people say, no, I don't pull my hair out. There's no way that I do that. But at the same time, you know, if your scalp is super itchy and you're sleeping, you don't know if you're, you know, going to town and just like, you know, pulling out your hair or whatever. You know, that's one thing to note. So just be mindful of that. Take care of your scalp health, even outside of just taking oral finasteride or oral minoxidil or topical minoxidil or whatever. Your scalp health will determine your recovery in some cases. So again, another nice before and after picture. Yeah, it looks like he did improve some density. You know, he did improve on the density. I think this is realistic for a 6-month result, wouldn't you say, if you're looking at the screen, guys? I think it's pretty realistic. The scalp looks less oily, so that's definitely an improvement, at least in the area of concern. So the area of concern was definitely along the hairline and into the midsection of the scalp. And it looks like he improved that, right? So this improvement he's getting, we cannot solely attribute that, at least in my opinion, to the use of finasteride. Finasteride is definitely helping, don't get me wrong, but it's, you know, so whatever he did, whatever subsided, the inflammation from the seborrheic dermatitis is certainly helping. And look at that. Look at that stunning hair. Great. Very full, very, you know, nice and dense. He has good coverage. And this is what it's all about, right? Sticking on treatment and maybe whatever he did to improve his scalp health. Let's look at the caption to see if he actually says anything about that. I'm curious if he even notices it. So he says this, quote, started treatment on July 15th, 2025, age 24. 1, he uses 5% topical minoxidil twice daily. 2, he uses 1 milligram oral finasteride daily and also tried 0.5 milligram and faced hairline thinning. Now he's back to 1 milligram. So I guess at one point he went to 0.5 milligram thin daily, but then he, again, returned to 1 milligram. He does derma stamping. So my opinion on derma stamping still hasn't changed. I think it's largely unnecessary, especially when you have, you know, scalp conditions where you have seborrheic dermatitis or weird red flaky, you know, plaques on your skin. It's not a good idea to microneedle, because what you're doing is essentially you're introducing whatever microbe is causing that issue on the surface into deeper layers of the tissue. Not a good idea. You should probably stop doing that. Just my opinion. He talks about how he had side effects from finasteride, low libido, but he says it has improved during the first few months, but, you know, not like before finasteride. So, I mean, you know, that's something some people deal with, and with continued use, it certainly goes away. So he's also considering of, you know, getting a hair transplant if his hairline becomes thin again, and he hasn't had any sort of hair loss in his crown, only a diffuse thinning and hairline issues. So yeah, that's pretty much the summary of his problems. But I'm curious to see if anyone pointed out to him his scalp health issues. I don't see it. I don't see anyone pointing it out. Yeah, I don't see anyone making that case. I did see some people asking if the derma stamping is helping grow his hair. As for an example, we can see in this comment by the user ownvisual9 says, quote, do you think derma stamping helped with regrowth, unquote. Again, I don't think this is helpful. I don't think it's wise to do that, especially if you have a scalp skin condition. There aren't any long-term studies on the improvement of scalp quality by using derma stamps, and it tends to be that, people are like, oh, it can reverse fibrosis, but those are typically on areas of the body that are thicker in terms of their dermal structure. Your scalp doesn't have that luxury. So if you cause a consistent trauma, even at, I guess, low depth, right? You can still destabilize the follicles and cause, a tremendous amount of issues. So it's probably better to just avoid it overall. Now, there is, and I talked about this before in another video of mine, talking about roflumilast. Roflumilast is a PDE4 inhibitor, and this particular brand, Zorve, again, not sponsored. This is a pharmaceutical company that did not sponsor me to make this video. It's educational, of course. But roflumilast can help with a wide variety of inflammatory scalp conditions, from, eczema, seborrheic dermatitis, plaque psoriasis. I mean, it lists it over here on the website. You can clearly see this. And some of the studies that I've seen, it's fantastic. Some of the case reports, people coming online with their own anecdotes. This topical is groundbreaking, right? It has a wide application for various inflammatory dermatological conditions. And there is a similar, drug, apremilast. It is also a PDE4 inhibitor. And essentially what happens is that when you inhibit PDE4, you increase the presence of this enzyme over here called cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or CAMP. And CAMP, when it goes up, it helps reduce the expression of pro-inflammatory, mediators like TNF alpha, interleukin 17, interleukin 23, and even TGF beta, I believe, right? So it's very helpful for, treating runaway inflammatory conditions. Now, apremilast is way more accessible in terms of price, but you don't have a topical for it, so you might have to go to a compounding pharmacy. Typically what they do is that they get the pills, they crush it up, and they put it into a solution, and then, they give it to you, right? It does have a higher molecular weight compared to roflumilast. I think Wikipedia has it over here. Let me see. Over here, right? 460.5 Dalton. Whereas I think roflumilast has 403.21 Dalton. Now, they're both underneath the Dalton rule, the dermatological rule, the 500 Dalton rule as it is. But still, I would wager that, topical apremilast could definitely help, right? As would roflumilast. It's just that one is, I guess you can say, more accessible than the other in different ways. Again, there is no topical apremilast. You have to get that compounded. But certainly, I think that's something that can help. Now, particular graphs over here, this happens when you inhibit PDE4. You're reducing a host of immunomarkers, right? Pro-inflammatory mediators. So, yeah, pretty good for dermatological conditions that are kind of like a runaway inflammatory issue. So I don't want to yap too much. Obviously, this guy made a decent improvement. I'm going to think that much of his improvement came from the minoxidil and also the subsiding of whatever inflammatory scalp condition he had. With that being said, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully, I wasn't just yapping too much. And also, I started a company. That's Folligens, FOLLIGENZ.com. Right now, we're selling liposomal minoxidil sulfate. We're running it as a cosmetic. We're currently out of stock. At the time of recording this video, it is February 2nd, 2026 at 1:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do have to go to work in 6 hours, but still, you can put your name here in the newsletter, and you'll be notified whenever we come out with new products or whenever we go back in stock. So, thanks for watching this video, guys, and I hope to see you on the next one. Peace out, guys. And wow, look at that recovery. Bye, guys.